Hey guys, today we will be doing a video on A-level biology classification topic. So what is classification? Classification is a grouping of organisms. And why do we carry out this practice? Well, there are literally millions on millions of different living organisms in the world. And such diversity makes this study a difficult and arduous task. So by classifying them on the basis of shared features, it becomes easier to coordinate all the information gathered and to absorb all of that information and to draw conclusions from the information. So classification basically consists of something called a taxa or a taxonomic unit, and organisms are basically grouped or categorized into these taxonomic units, and these taxonomic units basically form something called a hierarchy. And there are a lot of different types of taxa. At the foremost of the hierarchy we have a domain, and then we have division into kingdom, then we have further division into phylum, further division into classes, then into orders, then into families, into genera, singular, genus, and at the end we get a species. At this level we're only interested at the domain and the kingdom level of classification, something to keep in mind. Right. So basically there are three domains: domain Eukarya, domain Bacteria, and domain Archaea. And previously you would have, from previous study of this syllabus, you would have known that scientists had been classifying living organisms into two basic categories: prokaryotes and eukaryotes, based on vastly different cellular structures. And till the 1970s, these were the two main domains. However, this classification was changed in the 1970s. And why was this changed? Well, basically, scientists discovered prokaryotic organisms that were able to survive extremely arduous, extremely intolerant conditions. And there were some prokaryotes discovered that were able to survive in hot springs, where the temperature of the water often exceeds 100 degrees Celsius. And these prokaryotes were termed as extremophiles. And while they were indeed prokaryotes, however, a distinction was definitely made. Previously we just had bacteria, which were the prokaryotes, but now we had some other type of prokaryote that was somehow distinct from the. And what were the distinctions? Number one being its ability to survive in such arduous conditions. However, this wasn't the only reason. There were some clear molecular distinctions as well. The clearest being that when the molecular biology of these extremophiles was studied, a surprising fact was discovered, and that was that the ribosomal RNA, or the gene that coded for the ribosomal RNA, surprisingly resembled the eukaryotic genes of a similar purpose more than the bacterial genes of the same purpose. And this was really surprising because although they still had 70s ribosomes like bacteria, and this wasn't the only difference, though perhaps the most distinct and the one found the quickest. So, let's now talk about the individual domains. And while we're discussing the domains, we will compare especially the domain archaea and the domain bacteria. So, the domain bacteria and the domain archaea, neither of them have a true nucleus, and neither of them possess membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, and both of them have DNA in the form of a single circular molecule of DNA. However, it is at this point another distinction comes. And what is that distinction? While the circular loop of DNA of domain bacteria is not associated with any histone proteins and therefore termed as naked DNA, the circular DNA of archaea are in fact associated with histone proteins and therefore cannot be termed as naked DNA. Alright? Another thing, domain bacteria, they definitely all have cell walls. And what is that cell wall made up of? Not of cellulose, as those of you who in GCSE might expect, but made up of peptidoglycan. And the same goes for archaea, in that all of them will possess a cell wall. But the cell wall is not made up of peptidoglycan, and this is another distinction. So by now we have clarified three distinctions between the prokaryotic domains, domain archaea and domain bacteria, in terms of the gene that code ribosomal RNA, the DNA being naked or not naked, and the substance that makes the cell walls of the members of each domain. Then there are other things, namely that both of them, because they aren't true cells, because they don't have a true nucleus, they do not reproduce by mitosis, rather they reproduce by something called binary fission. And both of them also contain smaller circular molecules of DNA called plasmids, and both of them have 70s ribosomes, which are smaller in size than the 80s ribosomes that are found in eukaryotes. And both of them may exist as single cells or small groups of cells. Now this is domain bacteria and domain archaea, and they have a lot of similarities, both being prokaryotic. However, they have three clear distinctions. Now let's come on to the last domain, which is domain eukarya. And domain eukarya is obviously all of them happen to be eukaryotic. All of them will have a true nucleus. All of them will have membrane-bound organelles. Alright? And all of them will have linear chromosomes with associated histone proteins, and they will all have 80s ribosomes, and there will be a lot of diversity. They can be unicellular, they can be colonial and multicellular, and they will divide by mitosis because they have a true nucleus, and they have a lot of methods of reproduction, both sexual and asexual. As in the case of domain archaea and domain bacteria, we only have an asexual mean of reproduction via binary fission. However, there is a greater variety of reproductive means in the domain Eukarya. We both have asexual and sexual means. An example of an asexual means of reproduction can be found in the kingdom Plantae, a subdivision of domain Eukarya. They have a lot of ways of asexual vegetative propagation, say from underground storage organs, for example. Right. And another interesting thing I forgot to tell you about the domain Archaea was that they have a lot of unusual features. They have some unusual enzymes, and the unusual thing about them is that they are very tolerant to extremes of conditions, unlike other enzymes which are readily denatured. And there are also actually some times that are completely anaerobic, as in incapable of surviving in aerobic conditions, and some of them actually produce methane. And an interesting thing noted by scientists was that, surprisingly, Archaea may be more closely related to the Eukarya than to the bacteria, and it is hypothesized that the Archaea and the Eukarya diverged much later than the divergence of the Archaea and the bacteria. So the Archaea and the Eukarya may actually be more closely related than the Archaea and the bacteria. And it has also been found out that the methods of transcription of Archaea resemble the Eukarya a lot. However, the metabolism of the Archaea is in closer resemblance with the metabolism of the bacteria. And perhaps some of you might have gotten the weird idea that all of the domain Archaea are found in extreme conditions, but in fact many of them have been found in much less extreme conditions. An example of them would be the Archaea that form an important part of the planktons, which are an extremely important food source in the oceans. Right. And let's see if I missed out something. Yeah, this is about it. So the domain Eukarya is subdivided into 4 kingdoms. And what are they? We have the kingdom Animalia, the kingdom Plantae, the kingdom Protoctista, and the kingdom Fungi. So especially in this video I will be comparing kingdom Animalia and kingdom Fungi and kingdom Plantae, and I will also be closely comparing kingdom Plantae and kingdom Fungi and kingdom Protoctista with all 3 other kingdoms. Now let us begin with kingdom Fungi. And something to be noted is that a lot of you might compare fungi with plants, and there are in fact some traits that make them seem pretty related. However, there are huge differences. Number 1 being that the kingdom fungi are exclusively heterotrophic and never autotrophic. And what does that mean? That means that unlike plants, they never contain chloroplast and they will never photosynthesize, and will only be able to gather their nutrients from already made organic molecules. And fungi are basically of 2 types. They are either decomposers, that is, they feed on dead decaying matter, or they may be parasites of living organisms. Another huge distinction between kingdom fungi and kingdom Plantae is that whereas some plants do have cilia and flagella, for example the sperms of ferns, the kingdom fungi never have cilia or flagella. Never. And another interesting thing about fungi is that unlike plants, they have a huge range of possible sizes, and the range goes from the microscopic yeast to a particular species of the honey fungus found in a forest of inconstancy which covers 160,000 meter square area. That is a lot of land, and not all of it is exposed on the surface. Much of it is found underground, and this is also perhaps the oldest living organism with its suspected age ranging from 1500 to 10,000, and it is said to weigh approximately 10,000 tons. And another thing that completely distinguishes fungi from plantae is that fungi, they basically, the microscopic ones, they divide by binary fission, and the more complicated ones, they replicate via means of spores, and this is not done in kingdom plantae. And another very important thing is that while they do have cell wall, unlike kingdom plantae, it is not made up of cellulose, rather it is made up of something called chitin, and this distinguishes it from kingdom bacteria, from domain bacteria as well, which has cell walls made up of peptidoglycan, right? And hopefully the differences have been made clear. And another thing is that whereas fungi can be unicellular and multicellular, all plants are multicellular. Alright? And when it comes to the comparison of kingdom plantae and kingdom Animalia, number one, they are both multicellular. However, plants have cell wall, whereas animals do not have cell wall. Plants have a limited number of specialized cells, whereas animals have a huge number of specialized cells. Again, they both happen to be eukaryotic. And animals are literally, they have something called a nervous system which is completely absent in plants. Another thing being that all animals happen to be heterotrophic, whereas plants happen to be autotrophic. And plants have larger permanent vacuoles, animals have smaller vacuoles. And another have it. Let's come on to the last kingdom, which is kingdom Protoctista. And it is literally a box where any eukarya which isn't fungi, animalia or plantae, we simply put them in because there's a lot of diversity here, and some of them have plant-like cells, and sometimes they call them algae like seaweed, and some of them have animal-like cells without a cell wall and stuff, and we call them protozoa, which is simple animal. And often members of Protoctista resemble other kingdoms more than members that are present within itself, that is present within the same kingdom. And there is a lot of controversy about this because many members of this, scientists argue, better belong to one of the other three kingdoms. For example, there are strong arguments that the algae should belong to the kingdom Plantae. And hopefully this video was helpful. If you like, please like it.